We are all here because someone had sex. Sexuality is a central part of life, and no one should be ashamed to talk about it. And yet many people are very reluctant to discuss sex, which raises a number of questions. Why is it harder to communicate about sex than nearly any other topic? You might have some answers about that. Why do people lie more about sex than about any other topic? I have an entire research program focused on the lies that people tell about sex, but that's for a different talk. Why are people more reluctant to use accurate terminology about sexuality than about any other topic? Some people will not even refer to their own genitals by their correct names, but we don't misname any other of our body parts. People are complicated. The brain is the largest human sex organ, and it does not always agree with the rest of our body. Many of us live in cultures in which sexual communication is considered somehow inappropriate. Sex is a behavior in which we all engage, but very few people are comfortable talking about it, even with their closest contacts. Now, that's not true of everyone, of course. Some people talk about sex far too often, especially in the workplace, where it can be deeply inappropriate. I am lucky enough to be a sex researcher and get to teach college courses about sexuality. So for me, talking about sex is very work appropriate. There are 5 categories of people to whom you should be talking about sexuality. First, your sexual partners. Sometimes people won't even talk to one another about contraception. I am aware of a situation where 2 people were involved in an unintended pregnancy, and when asked why they didn't discuss contraception before they had sex, the response was, "We didn't know each other well enough." That's a problem. Many people, men and women alike, have questions about female sexuality, including researchers, but we are certainly getting closer to an understanding. Researchers know that there is an orgasm gap between men and women when they have sex with one another, which means that women are much less likely to experience orgasm during sexual activity with a man than the man is. But this orgasm gap disappears when both partners are women. Why is that? It's because when men and women have sex, there is an overemphasis on the penis and an underemphasis on the clitoris. Many people don't understand the function of the clitoris. The clitoris is the female counterpart of the penis, and it is the only part of the body that is exclusively devoted to pleasure. The clitoris is both an external and an internal organ, which is relatively new knowledge, even to sex researchers. However, we have known since the time of Kinsey that orgasm is not possible for most women without direct clitoral stimulation. But that is information that has not been conveyed clearly to the general public. On the other hand, you can expect your partner to already know what gives you pleasure. Not all women are the same. Not all men are the same either with regard to their sexual functioning. More and more research is indicating the truth of that. Sexual functioning changes over time. So what once was pleasurable may no longer be. New sensations may begin to be pleasurable. But if that can't be discussed within a couple, it will deprive one or both of them of sexual pleasure. Faking orgasm is unfortunately somewhat common in both men and women. And it is a form of miscommunication. There are many motives for doing so, but it means failing to communicate with one's partner about the reality of one's sexual pleasure. So it definitely does not lead to a better sexual relationship. Many women, and many more men than you might imagine, experience pain during sexual activity. This is not the way it's supposed to be. This is not normal or typical, and direct communication could help keep this from happening. Good sexual communication is related to sexual satisfaction in long-term relationships. That makes perfect sense. And of course, sexual satisfaction is highly correlated with relationship satisfaction. All of these factors work together to create happiness in a relationship. For people in consensual, non-monogamous relationships, which are becoming more and more common, communication is what helps this arrangement work for them. The second category of people to whom you should be talking about sex is your children. Parents are often reluctant to discuss sexuality with young children, but childhood is really a good age to start. Children are very curious, and they provide many, many opportunities for discussion. Almost certainly they will be asking questions about reproduction, and you can answer those questions truthfully, giving them enough for them to process, but not more than they need to hear, and being sure to use the correct terminology. It doesn't help children if you make up a story to tell them about where babies come from. They're going to find out the truth eventually, and when they do, they will become highly skeptical of you as a source of useful information. You want to become an approachable parent while your kids are children so that they will be comfortable approaching you when they are teens. And that brings us to the third category of the people to whom you should be talking about sex, your teenagers. But don't wait for them to ask. They might not. Start the conversation yourself. And don't have just one conversation, have many conversations. Many parents think it might be unnecessary to discuss sexuality with their teenagers, but parent-child communication about sex is essential if you want your children to understand and to share your values. They can't share your values unless you talk to them about them. I've done quite a bit of research that indicates that parents who have talked to their children about sex have teenagers who share their values, which means that relatively more conservative parents end up with relatively more conservative teens. Relatively more permissive parents end up with relatively more permissive teens, but only if they've been talking about it. Strict abstinence messages, whether at home or at school, fail far more often than condoms. It is hard to control teenagers in general. It is harder still to control their sexuality. And the statistics indicate that the majority of teenagers will become sexually active sometime during their teen years. The statistics also indicate that teenagers still get much of their information about sexuality from their friends. And adolescent peer communication is often very inaccurate. Think back to your own teenage years. The chances are that you were told at least one thing that was outrageously wrong. Even college students share a great deal of sexual misinformation with one another. Many adolescents and very young adults have never had the experience of talking to a knowledgeable adult about sexuality. But I know of some who have been lied to about sex in a deliberate attempt to discourage sexual activity. And they don't take it well when they find out. Clear communication is particularly important with regard to reducing the risks of sexual activity for teenagers. Although many parents might not want to think that it is necessary or advisable to talk to their teenagers about pornography, in today's world, that is a reality that must be addressed. Teenagers have access to pornography. The internet has made it completely unavoidable. And if teens use pornography as their primary source of information about sexuality, they will not only be uninformed, but they will be deeply disappointed. You need to make sure that your teens understand that pornography does not reflect reality. It is a fantasy world. While you're talking to your teens about sex, don't forget to talk to them about consent. And make sure that they understand that they need to hear a yes from a potential partner and not simply the absence of no. The next category of people to whom you should be talking about sexuality are your medical professionals. Unfortunately, many medical professionals really don't have much training in sexuality. And being human, they are also uncomfortable in discussing it with their patients. Now, many of them are great, but some of them are not so great with regard to bringing up sexual topics with patients. There are sexual side effects for common medications like antidepressants, some of the medications used to treat high blood pressure, and even oral contraceptives. But medical professionals often neglect to share that information with their patients, so you should ask them about it. Sexuality after surgery, an accident, even childbirth is often not discussed by doctors, so you should ask them about those things. For older members of the audience, you have as much of a right to a satisfying sex life now than you did when you were younger. And talking to your doctor could help to distinguish some of the natural and normal changes of aging to something more serious that could and should be addressed. And finally, you should talk to yourself about sexuality. Ask yourself, what do I want? What do I like? Who do I like? Is sex even something in which I am interested? Am I comfortable with any risks that I might be taking? A degree of introspection is very, very helpful in learning about one's own sexual expression and pleasure. If you can't talk to yourself about sex, it will be much harder to talk to others. But you should remember to be as tactful with yourself as you should be with your partners. No matter what your value system or ideas about the role that sexuality should play in life, communication about sex will only make it better. Sexuality is a central part of life for so many people, and it is something that should be discussed more openly. I understand that it is uncomfortable to talk about sex, but it doesn't have to be. Go ahead and think about the 5 categories of people to whom you should be talking about sex, and make a promise to yourself that you'll do it. Your children, your partners, and you will all be better off for your having done so.